this is like a perfect psalm. In fact, I even thought later, I was like, man, we should have done this next week. It would have been great. And I think Bryant would have been pumped to preach that next week. But that is not the case, and I get the benefit of picking perfectly for today. All right, so today's thought, and kind of here's what I want to do for us this morning, just a little bit. All right, we're going to be going through the Psalms. Volume 2 is, I believe it's chapter 43 all the way through 73. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind when it comes to our Psalms. We're going to kind of pick some specific selected Psalms throughout that process. What we'll do here is I got a sermon here this morning for you, and then we have some communion that we'll take at the end. So just looking forward to that as well. But before we get really dig into this, I just want to ask this, and this is where I'm asking for you to participate. All right, I want your responses. It's okay to say it out loud. I won't get on to you unless you're bearded and you have flip-flops this morning. Other than that, I won't get on to you. Okay, it's becoming a thing. So, if you could create the perfect king or queen, president, whatever you want to call it, okay, all right? If you could create that one, what type of qualities might they possess? What type of qualities would they possess? If you're thinking about the perfect queen, king, president, ruler, okay, what qualities would they possess? Integrity. Very good. That's good. Thank you. What else? Wisdom, yes. They need to be wise, indeed. I hope so. Hope they're wise. Yeah. Human. What else? What do you say? Human. We do want them to be a human. That is important. Because if not, yeah. We don't want a robot president. All right, that would not go over well. Well, maybe it may actually might not be that bad. Get on that, Disney. Maybe. No, not. I don't know. I don't know who. Somebody can create that. All right. We got some engineers in here. You guys can do it. All right. Knowledge. They need knowledge. They don't just need wisdom, right? But they also need to know, right? They need to know about those things. And then obviously treat that knowledge with wisdom. That's good. What else? Compassion, indeed. In fact, we see that right throughout all of these, by the way. I think every single one of these, other than the human answer, okay, are all here, right? And absolutely compassion is important for sure. Anything else? Experience. Yeah, you don't want somebody who's 16. If you're about to be 16, as much as I appreciate the 16-year-old, right? You'll go all Ben and like create, the Ice World thing that he created, right? Ice Town. What's it called? I can't remember. Yeah, Ice Town. Okay. Yeah, a little Parks and Rec reference for you there. That would not go well. This whole budget on Ice Town. No bueno. But yeah, you need experience. Anything else? These are good things. Okay, let me ask you this. What would they? What would be the things they would be most concerned with? What would most concern them? Like this person, this perfect one, right? Or as close to perfect as they could be. What things would they be concerned about? What'd you say? People. Yeah, people need to be important for sure. Yep. Justice. Okay. All right. It's a big word. Lots to it. But yes, indeed. Justice for sure. Do what's right. Anything else? No wrong answers in brainstorming. I promise. Well, other than, yeah, that's fine. I just teased. No wrong answers. How about from a kid in here? Caleb, what do you got? What would be something that they would be concerned with? What do you think? Caleb Hill. Just to clarify that, because I'm looking at both of you right now. You can phone a friend. It's fine. What do you say? Problems. Yeah. They want to solve problems, right? They need to be concerned about the problems. Yeah, very good. Very good. Yeah, thanks, Keith. Anything else? How about this? How might they influence the mood and morale of their citizens? What do you think about that? Right? They would inspire them. Yes, very good. Very good. How else? They would be an example. Okay, they'd model for them what it means to be a citizen of whatever X country. Yeah, very good. Anything else? These are good answers. I want you to think about these things, right? So this is, as we think about it, I'll be honest with you, after this week, it feels like every week, at the end of each week, I'm going, oh, and sometimes you get this Twitter hole. You ever been there? You're just like, why am I doing this? Why am I here? Why am I on social media? Why am I doing this? It's just making me depressed to hear people's responses to each other, hear people's responses to the whatever's going on in the world, right? Whether they're celebrating what's happening or whether they're lamenting it. It can just get very frustrating. And the thing that comes from this, though, seriously, is everybody wants the same thing. You know what they want? They want a better world. Don't you? They want a world where they feel safe. They want a world where they can be comfortable. They want a world with leaders who they can trust. Right? And every single one of them, it doesn't matter which side of the thing you're on. It doesn't matter whether you're wrong or right or in between, depending on what your personal opinion is, or all these different things. Everybody wants the same stuff. They want leaders they can trust. They want leaders they believe in. And they want a world that's better than the one they're currently in. And here we find Solomon writing just like we would find today. It's better written, okay? I can actually say it in company with children, right? Instead of some of the things I read on Twitter or social media of any sort, right? But the reality is it's the same motives, the same heartbeat. They're yearning for something more. Romans 8 talks about this, that ever since the fall, creation, not even just human beings, but all of creation has been yearning for the day when the world will be made new again. Right? It's inside of us to want it. I think about my kids, right? Sammy and Caleb, and maybe you kids who are in here this morning as well, okay? You think about Christmas and how much you want Christmas to be tomorrow. Maybe that's you, or maybe it's your birthday, or whatever day you want to say, or vacation, or what. You just can't wait until the day. Right? If we have this rule in our household, which sometimes I break, which is if there's some big event coming, like spending the night with their cousins, or their grandparents are coming into town, or we're going to go on vacation, we have to wait until like the day before to tell our kids, because if we don't, we won't stop hearing about it. Right? And then it will just frustrate us, and then we're not going on vacation. Right? That's it. No, I'm just kidding. That's usually what I say. It's not what I actually do, right? You just get right. So we have to wait because they cannot wait. And I wonder if that same yearning that's there for those things, it still speaks to the same thing. We want a world that we can get excited about. We want a world that we feel safe. We want a world where we can't wait to be a part of it. And the world we have today is not that world. At least not in its entirety, right? So this psalm, okay, it's by Solomon. As I said just a moment ago, Solomon, right? He's the son of David. Now, to put this in perspective, we talk about leaders we can trust. Remember, Solomon, right, is the son of Bathsheba. Bathsheba was not David's first wife, right? So Solomon comes from a broken home. We'll put it that way, okay? Very, very broken, if you just want to be honest, right? And Solomon is born out of this. There's lots of turmoil that he's very young when he takes over. In fact, he's probably the same age as my son. We talked about experience a second ago. Solomon did not have any experience other than what he had experienced in his home and was very little. His dad, David, was removed from his kids at best, kind of aloof at best, to be honest. And you see that play out in the relationships of the kids to one another. It's a messed up situation, but Solomon is the chosen king, not just by David, but by God himself. It's been passed down. In fact, later in Solomon's reign, I'm going to just speak to you a little bit about his beginning, but later God comes along to David or Solomon, and he says the same things he's told David, which is this: your kingdom will go on forever. There will always be one of your sons on the throne, as long as the throne exists. Eventually, of course, the fulfillment of that, the completion of that, right, is in Jesus. Right? So Solomon, at the same age, about 11, 12 years old, he's given the kingdom. And so then he has this dream. And in the dream, God comes to him and speaks to him. And in the dream, God said, Solomon, I keep trying to say David, Solomon and God have this exchange. And in the exchange, have a conversation. And God tells him, he says, anything you want, What do you need, Solomon? What do you need, essentially? And Solomon says, I'm young, I'm inexperienced, I don't know a lot, I need wisdom, essentially, so that I can rule your people and my people as a good king should. And I want wisdom for that, and I want to lead my people with discernment of good and evil. I want to do what's right. And it pleased the Lord, it says. And God gives this to him. In fact, if you look throughout Solomon's life, Solomon is known for wisdom. He wrote books of wisdom. He writes Psalms. He writes Ecclesiastes. He writes he's a part of the Song of Solomon even, right? There's tons of things he's known for. In fact, Queen Sheba, okay, one of the queens comes and learns from Solomon, right? And spends time getting to know Solomon, who Queen Sheba would have been a very well-known queen at the time. A very important ruler. Rulers came to know more, right? And so we look to him now today. Now, what's interesting about this psalm, real quick before we get into it, is Solomon begins to talk about stuff that are beyond him. The reason this is what we call a messianic psalm, which means this: it points us to Jesus. Here's why. Because the things that Solomon wants and he prays for here are not possible to be fulfilled by Solomon. That's why. So they point us to Jesus because he's the only one who can fully fulfill this. There's maybe bits and pieces that we can see. There's things that we want, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. But at the end of the day, it's going to point us to Jesus. They go well beyond. It's almost an overreach, right? So let's talk about this. So good rulers. So let's go here to the idea of the perfect king, and we'll go to this first idea for us this morning. It's this: the burden of responsibility and calling placed on governmental leaders. So I'll say that again. The burden of responsibility and calling placed on governmental leaders. So the people in ruling, the burden of responsibility and calling placed on governmental leaders, there is a burden that comes along with that. You think about even our mayor, Brandon Whipple, he has, right, a burden of responsibility. And it's specific. Its scope is very limited to Wichita, but it's there. And I guarantee you there are nights where he doesn't sleep because of something that happened or something that's coming or whatever it is, right? Our president, he's got a burden of responsibility, right? And therefore, by the way, we should be praying for these men and women who lead us because the burden is great. And as somebody who has a very limited scope of leadership, right, to a church, and has been so for many years, I'll tell you, that burden does keep you up at night. That burden it's almost like, imagine if this gorilla that was hanging on your shoulder all the time. That's what it is to lead people. And not because the people are that, but it's just hanging on to you all the time. It's hard to escape. It's hard to run from. And that's not me lamenting that, right? I just want you to understand it's a big burden. And obviously the bigger the influence, the bigger the responsibility, obviously the bigger the gorilla, right? So to speak, all right? I probably should use a different one, but I was going to use sloth, and I was like, that's probably not very nice. So I made it a gorilla. All right? Right? But also there's a calling placed on government. There's a calling to lead well, to lead in a specific way. And here's the other thing about this. Understand this very clearly. Leaders, and this is to the leaders in this church, this is leaders everywhere, they will give an account for the way that they've led. Okay? There's a calling placed on them. And it's not just a calling from their own government, for their own organization. There's a calling of God to lead in a specific way. And if they don't, and when they don't, because they won't always, they're going to be held accountable. Maybe not right away, right? But it will happen. Because God is not aloof. He's not disinterested. He is very interested in it. He is watching. And that is something important for us to understand, okay? So, a couple thoughts here. Number one, when we see this in verse 1, let's read verse 1 for a second. Give the king your justice, O God. Now remember, this is a prayer. He's asking God for these things. And your righteousness to the royal son. By the way, this is something you can pray for your president. Take this and flip it on its head. Your governmental leaders, your pastors, your, whatever leader, you can pray specifically, especially the first 4 verses, very easily for these people in your life. So number one is to rule with justice and righteousness. That's our first thought. To rule with justice and righteousness. Now, here's the question though, okay? Justice has this idea of, the opposite of that would be injustice, right? And with injustice comes evil. And here's my question for us today is this: what's evil? You like that? That's right. Skills. Call that keynote. All right, anyways, right? What is evil? What is it? Merriam-Webster, yeah, I'm going there. Okay, I'm going to do the whole dictionary thing first, okay? Here's what it says. It says any immoral or wicked act. Now, that's interesting because what is immoral? What is wicked? We're asking that question today, aren't we? Maybe not. Maybe you're not asking it, but the world is asking this question because there's no definition. In a world where God does not exist, there is no basis for this. So then what is? You go down that road for a long ways, right? This guy, Rollo, I think it was a guy. I don't actually know. Actually, now I say that. This person, Rollo Romig, okay? It's pretty, I don't know. Anyways, in the New Yorker, he writes this article, and he's talking about this idea of what is evil. And here's kind of his conclusion. His conclusion is this, that it's any voluntary act which shatters our trust in the world. So any voluntary act which shatters our trust in the world. He specifies as voluntary because maybe there's people who do evil things and didn't mean to do them. That's why they say it that way, okay? Again, I'm just reporting to you what people are saying, okay? All right? Maybe this way. Maybe we can get, this might define it better for us. Holocaust, segregated South, 9/11, Uvalde shootings, mass shootings, murder, theft, racism, lynchings, acts done against children, taking advantage of those unable to fight for themselves. Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, Osama bin Laden, BTK, Salvador Ramos, Lee Harvey Oswald, and Thanos. You're listening. Thank you. I have to put that in there just for that very case. All right. Evil. How do we define it? N.T. Wright says it this way. He says, here's what evil can be. It's when humanity of another is denied. So he's very specific about the idea of the acts of evil, what's happening specifically. And he says, when humanity of another is denied. That has some big ramifications. He continues. He says, the Bible doesn't offer a theory about evil. He says, but it tells us the story of how it works, its effects, and what God is doing about it. And then to get the old trusty John Piper in there, if you don't know who he is, he's a pastor, author, leader. He says it this way: any action preferring anything more than God, that's evil. And loving anything not for God's cause, that's what evil is. So here's just a thought then. When it comes to this idea of justice, the kinds of rulers we want, when we say justice and righteousness, here's what we mean. Here's what I believe is meant by this biblical understanding is this. It means to fight against all evils, both internal and external, and to do good for the sake of God's glory and our benefit, whether they know it or not. So that should be up there, Keith. You want to hit the next slide there, bud? It means to fight against all evils, both internal and external, and to do good for the sake of God's glory and our benefit. Whether they know it or not, that's what it means to fight for injustice, to fight for justice and fight for righteousness. For that to be given to our rulers. That's what we're asking for. Right now, again, when we ask God for that, again, they may not be doing it for those sakes, but that's still what happens. Or again, I point you to the biblical story of, not again, but I've pointed you there before, of the king of Persia, who sends people, Ezra, back to go help establish the Jewish kingdom. God puts it on his heart to do this. Right? That's God's movement. That's God's movement. And there were people there that were suffering and being punished, and because there were no walls, there was no protection for them. And so he sends them back to take care of it. Doing the will of God, and didn't even know maybe he was doing the will of God. Or maybe didn't know why. But it was his idea. Really God's idea. Secondly, what does he call for? To judge impartially. This is really important. Look at verse 2. May he judge your people with righteousness and the poor with justice. To judge impartially. What does it mean to be impartial? What does it mean? I'd have you answer that. What does it mean to be impartial? Somebody want to give me an answer on that one? Say it again. To be fair. To be fair. Yep. Go for it. Unbiased. Yes, that's good. Okay, let's look at Exodus chapter 23. God is giving commandments to his people specifically about how their government will be established. And by the way, he never meant for them to have a king, King Solomon, because their king should have been him. And yet they wanted what the world wanted. And he gave it to them. But before this, here's what he says. No, nor shall be partial to a poor man in his lawsuit. Here's what that means. Oh man, I know he's probably in the wrong, but he's got some hard luck on him. I'll judge in his favor, right? Or the opposite. You shall not pervert the justice to due to your poor in his lawsuit. Meaning this, don't judge on the side of the rich person because they're going to give you something. Don't judge on the side of the rich person because they have better influence. You judge impartially, which means you judge rightly. Okay? Regardless of who's at fault. We want leaders who will do this. We want leaders who will establish laws, not because it fills their pockets, right? But they establish laws because it's good for the people of America. That's what we want, right? All right, third, we have this idea to create conditions of flourishing. Man, don't we want that? It's not a bad thing to ask for us to flourish. Think about it this way, the thermostat idea, right? We have this I know in my household, if I come to breakfast in a bad mood, our entire family will be in a bad mood because I kind of set the tone. Now, not every family is wired that way, but in my family, that's how it works. Okay? Now, that's maybe shifting a little bit as we get kids with, attitudes. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's besides the point. Sorry, kids. Right? But at the end of the day, if I'm in a good mood, it does set a good tone. Right? There's people in this room right now that if we're excited about what's going on, guess what? We're going to set a tone. Right? You're going to set a good tone. Or if you're like cranky, well, guess what? You're going to set a tone. You're going to establish some conditions. And specifically our leaders, we want them to create conditions of flourishing. Here's what I'm not meaning. I don't mean capitalism. That's not what I'm talking. That might be something that helps. That's not what I mean. I mean to create a condition of influence that creates the possibility for good things to happen. Look at this quote from, I think it's Derek Kidner. He's talking about this idea of, he says, shalom and peace, or prosperity is how I think it's quoted like that in the ESV, but it's really meant shalom and peace, is the byproduct of fruit of a kingdom that has righteousness and justice as its foundation. This doesn't happen if you don't have the first two things happening, okay? But it's a byproduct of that, both in rule and in judgment, both in culture and provision for its citizens. I want you to see the picture of it. This is like the perfect picture of the idea of what is meant here. Look at verse 6. This is why Solomon's better than Twitter. May he be like, I love this. This just gets me so excited. Rain that falls on mown grass. Doesn't that just make you excited? Like showers that water the earth. Right? Am I the only one that feels this? Am I the only one that's like, man, there's nothing better than have mown your grass right before the rain came. And then you sit back and you enjoy your work. With a cup of coffee if it's cold, or maybe not cold, but a glass of iced tea, water, whatever it is, other beverages that you might enjoy, whatever it may be, okay, that you sit back and you enjoy the work. And you think about this idea of just the conditions being perfect. And this is what we're talking about. Now, if we're being honest, this is not what's happening anywhere. This is what we want. This is why your neighbors are mad. Not at you, but at the world. They might blame other people, but at the end of the day, they're mad because they want this. They yearn for this. They desperately want this. And this is why we see people just freaking out in some crazy ways today, because this isn't happening. And it was supposed to. If you think back, all the way back to our founding fathers, we're just talking specifically about America here for just a moment. I'm not going to get too political, but I just want you to hear this. This was the experiment that was supposed to work. And it ain't working. There are good things about it, but it's found wanting. And we're ticked off about it. And maybe there's some specific ideas and some specific things. And what we've seen in the last year and a half is we've seen both sides of the aisle and anyone in between. When it didn't go their way, we're freaking out. Right? Why? Because we want this desperately. It's not because we're terrible people. It's because this is what we want. And it's not happening. But it will. And that's what we need to point them to. And I think there can also be some bits and pieces where they can get a little taste of that to come. Lastly, and this is just as important as anything else, if they're going to rule with righteousness and justice, they're going to judge impartially. They're creating conditions of flourishing. Also, really important to this is defending the defenseless. Well, they fight for that. Go to page 485 for just a second. Page 485 in your blue Bibles, if you're there, or Matthew chapter 25 in your Bibles or on your phones. And look at verse 40. You probably heard this verse. This is a vision of the kingdom to come that Jesus is giving. He's talking about the final judgment. And he gives us a picture of two different sets of people. Those who did good for the poor, stuck up for the prisoner, went to the defenseless, went to their aid, provided things for them, and those who didn't. And he's showing something very important for us to understand. By the way, as a church, we need to be we need to take this responsibility too, right? To look out for the outsider, to look out for those. The church should be the first place where they find this. So we shouldn't have to go look for the government to figure this out. That's what the church is here for too, right? We can't do it all. We can't do it for everyone. We can do it for a few. And in our specific little corner of America, we can do it too. But look at verse 40. And the king will answer them truly, and he's speaking to those who have done these things. He says, and truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of them, my brothers and my people, you have done it to me. Right? He's saying somehow inside of this, when you do those acts, you're doing it as though you're doing it for me. So when somebody walks in our doors who maybe is different than us, regardless of what they look like, who maybe feels that day they're an outsider, when we love them and we show them love, we're doing it as though we're doing it to Christ. And the beauty of it is they deserve that anyways because they are a human being and they are created in the image of God. But we should defend the defenseless. And there are all kinds of ways in which we can do this, and there are all kinds of ways in which the governments are set up to do this very thing. These are the kinds of things we want. One thing I want you to point to is, it's interesting. Look at the word your here in the first 4 verses. Your justice, your righteousness, your people, and your poor. Look how God owns this. You see that? See how he owns this? This is his. It's from his character that these things happen, and they are. These are his people. They are his, and he bears the responsibility of it. What if our leaders took the same idea? Right? They should. We should pray for that. Because that doesn't happen without the work of God. Because it's his justice, it's his righteousness, right? These are his people. God owns this. They're his. And Solomon understands that too. So real quick, the limited scope of influence and power for our earthly government leaders. Here's what happens though, right? This is where things begin to shift. Things begin to shift because all of a sudden we see that this isn't possible for Solomon to fulfill this. When you start reading, and we're going to read verses 5 through 11. Let's read those real quick. We already read verse 6, which we get to read again, and I'm excited about that. Verse 5, may they fear you, these leaders, may they fear you while the sun endures, and as long as the moon throughout all generations. That means forever, right? And well, it's not possible for Solomon to be that. May he be like rain that falls on the mown grass, like showers that water the earth. In his days may the righteous flourish and peace abound, till the moon be no more. May he have dominion from sea to sea and from river to river to the ends of the earth. May desert tribes bow down before him and enemies lick the dust. May the kings of Tarshish and of the coastlands render him tribute. May the kings of Sheba and Seba bring gifts. May all kings fall down before him, all nations serve him. This was never the point of Israel, necessarily in the sense that as far as a physical kingdom, for them to be a dominant power, an empire. It was never God's plan until the day when Christ would take the throne and he would ascend it forevermore and it would be his kingdom. It already is. That's already been done. And one day it will be complete. Right? But that was never the point. Solomon was never meant to have this empire. He meant to rule God's people. And so once again, we find out that this is not possible for him to do this all by himself. Look at the words of Derek Kidner up on the screen here. Solomon continues to speak more wisely than he was ever to act. That's an interesting thing for one of the wisest men on the earth, for us to say that about him. His prayers at his ascension, right? So that prayer I talked to you before where he asked God for wisdom, right? When he became king, and then also the dedication of the temple, they show the sensitivity which he admired in the king whom he describes here. He wants this. He desires this. But his people's verdict was that he made our yoke heavy. And if you look at the conversation later when Solomon's son is ruling, They go to Rehoboam and they say, listen, your father made it difficult for us. In fact, it says that in First Kings that Solomon drafted like tens of thousands of men and women to work every single day, basically forced labor to build the temple, to build these things, right? This is a guy who, he was supposed to, with justice, but he's forcing people into jobs. Whatever. We see also fully, right, he finishes very poorly as a king. But the point is Solomon never could have fulfilled this. He was going to be found wanting, right? Okay, I want to show you this picture just for a second. And this is something I think that is very good. Is there a picture next? Yeah, okay, thank you. Make sure I did that right. Okay, this is, in 2015, the UN got together and they came up with some goals for sustainable development around the world. Not just for America, right? This is for the world. So big time leaders come together, they make some plans, and these are good things. These are not bad things. These are things that we want, right? And we should want for our world. And regardless of your opinion of anything else, understand these are good things. No poverty, that's a good thing. Zero hunger, yeah, I'm okay with that, right? Good health and well-being, sure, we want people to be healthy. Quality education, absolutely. There are people around the world right now who have no access to quality education. Maybe because of their gender, or maybe because the quality of their situation. Maybe it's because of their economic status, whatever it is. That's not okay with me. And I want this to happen. Okay? These are good things to want. Gender equality, it depends on what you mean by that, but at the end of the day, we want men and women, they're equal on the side of God. Bottom line. They both have the image of God. Therefore, hey, we should, all right? Now, there's some, obviously, not every one of these is perfect, but that one is specific. We want that for our world. We should want that. We keep going. Clean water and sanitation. Yeah, we should want. There are people in this world who don't have access to clean water. I was complaining last week because my AC wasn't working. And there are people who don't have access to clean water. Affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth. I believe, if I remember correctly, in reading some of these things at the time, and it hasn't gone up very much more, there are millions of people around the world who make $1.20 a day. $1.20. When I was in the Philippines with the Lions, they told us $5 a month. So they make less than $1.20 a day. They live on $5 a month. Industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Reduce inequalities. These are all good things. Sustainable cities and communities. Responsible consumption and production. Climate action. Life below the water. We want fish we're able to eat. That's a good thing. Life on land. We want our land. We've been given this by God, right? We should want these things. Peace and justice. I don't need to say anything about that one. Partnerships for the goals, right? So this is a great plan. The problem is you look, and if you can go through this and look, man, we are not doing well at these things. And I don't want to point out like the flaws in this plan. No. These are good things. These are good things we want. My point is we don't have the capacity and the resources to fulfill this plan. At least not to the extent with which we need. Because see, here's the difference in mindsets, okay? Just for a second, I want us to understand this very clearly. What they're yearning for is the same thing we're yearning for. A better world whereby peace and justice reign. Whereby on the throne is a leader we can trust. The unfortunate part about it is what they think that we over here, this side, potentially who don't believe that there's a king named Jesus, right? Okay. What they'll find is they think that we have inside of us the capacities to do this. What we'll find is that's just not true. You know how I know that? I've thousands of years, centuries of governments who had global power, some of them, on some level. Their scope of influence was great. America's one of those. And we still don't have the capacities to do it. But I think we should still pray for these things to happen now. I think that's okay to do that. I think it's okay to understand there's a tension between. We're never going to see over here in our earthly kingdoms a full fulfillment of this. But what we will find is there might be bits and pieces of it. We should never be okay that there are people in this world who are hungry. And in any way possible, if we're able to help with that, we should. Right? We should never be okay that there are kids who are sleeping on floors and foster business, commercial buildings because there's no one to take them at night. That should bother us. This should. And here's the reality, though. You and I don't have the capacity to do all of that. But what I'm asking you to do is begin to pray about, God, what do you want me to do now? Right? There seems to be this in Christianity. Let me push back against you Christians for a second, us Christians for a second, okay? Just push back a little bit. Let me step on your toes a little bit because this is good for us. There seems to be this idea that because there's this better world coming where Jesus is going to fulfill all of this, that we forget that we have a calling and responsibility now. We live in a tension between now and then, but we're still called to do something about to do something about the now, right now. Now, a big portion of that is pointing them to the day when it will be fulfilled. A big portion of that, if we give them food, right, and we give them, we're doing good things, those are good things, but if they don't know Christ, we're shortchanging them. You have to have both. But it doesn't mean we just completely disregard people. We have to care. And so for us, for each of us, I'm not asking you to try to figure out how we solve every one of these things. You'll never do it alone. I think you know that. Because even the world's best powers can't do it. But you can help be part of the solution to some of it. And what's God calling you personally to do? What's God calling us as a church to do? This is actually some of the things we're asking right now. And in the coming months, we're going to give you a plan of some of the things God's calling us to do specifically in our part of Wichita, where we are devoted to this area and what that looks like. And we're not going to be able to solve it all, but God's given it. We can do this for one. We can do it for the one what we hope we can do for the many, right? We can do that. I'll get off my little platform, okay? And but I want us to see these are good things. Your neighbors and friends who don't know Christ, they want the same thing you want. They just don't know that Christ is the central piece to all of that. But maybe the first step for you is to begin to show them that Christians actually care. Maybe the first step, before they can know Christ, they have to understand, right, that they see Christ in you. They see your care and concern for these things. All right, we'll go on. All right, again, we'll keep going. Let's go to that last quote there. Go to the next slide there. It's from Os Guinness. He's specifically talking about the country of America. Here's what he says. We will never protect any freedom by law alone. The law is precious and to be admired as it is an integral bulwark for freedom. Law is good, he says, but it can never do what we hope it might by itself. He says you need what Tocqueville calls the habits of the heart. You need people that have a heart change, right? And and then Montesquieu says the spirit of the law in the hearts of the people. This means more litigation to fight litigation, i.e. the culture wars. You trying to solve issues of abortion, same-sex marriage, whatever. That's not going to solve the issues. Now, those things should matter to us. If we follow Jesus, those things should matter to us, okay? But us figuring out and solving this for people and having them go our way is not going to solve the issue. They need Christ more than anything else. And that's where we need to focus more than anything else. It will not solve the problem. The point, we don't have the answer. But there is a king who does. The better king. Real quick, let's talk about the better king, and then we will celebrate the better king as we remember what he did for us on the cross. The first thought is this: the better king. This picture of a perfect king who could only be Jesus. His endless reign, boundless peace, united world under one banner, fierce defender of the outcast and the downtrodden, all while not requiring a heavy burden. You remember Jesus' words. He says, "Oh, you who are heavy laden," meaning this, you have this huge burden around your neck. And what he meant there was, you people who think that and have been told by those in your stead who know the word of God, you people who've been told that you're not good enough and until you do X, Y, and Z. And so you need to strive to do all these moral actions to get God's favor. He says, that is not the way of the word. He says, I am the way. And he says, come to me, all you who are heavy and burdened, and I will give you rest. For my yoke is easy and it's light. And what is meant by there is his teachings were, I am the way. He is the way. It could only be through him. Are we pointing people there? Are we pointing people to this better king? When you think about this king that you serve, what do your actions and your words tell people? How often do you talk about him? It's easy to talk bad about presidents or rulers or governments or, whatever, because there's plenty of that to talk about. But how often do you talk about how good God is? How often do you talk about how good our perfect king is? And how often do you talk about how concerned he is for the world at large? And how that transfers into your life of desiring a better king? And then, of course, we have the picture of the better world. If you look at Psalm 72, what's interesting is in Revelation chapter 21, which is the end of all things through John, and also in Isaiah chapter 65, you see this picture that's almost word for word, exactly what we'll see in the future kingdom. But I want you to listen to the rest of the words, starting in verse 12. For he delivers the needy when he calls. The poor in him have no helper. The poor in him who has no helper. He has pity on the weak and the needy and saves the lives of the needy. From oppression and violence he redeems their life, and precious is their blood in his sight. He cares about everyone. Long may he live. May the gold of Sheba be given to him. May prayer be made for him continually, and blessings invoked for him all the day. May there be abundance of grain in the land. On the crops of the mountains may it wave. May its fruit be like Lebanon, and may purple blossom in the cities like the grass of the field. May his name endure forever. His fame continue as long as the sun. May people be blessed in him. All nations call him blessed. Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, all who alone does wondrous things. Blessed be his glorious name forever. May the whole earth be filled with his glory. May the whole earth be filled with his glory. There will be a day when that's true. There will be a day when not only is the better king there, but there's also the better world. You want to go to the next slide there, Keith? Thanks, bud. Appreciate you. The better world. We have this king who rules a better world, and the whole earth will be filled with his glory. This is the kind of world we have coming our way. And we want to point them to that. To the idea of the glory of God being so rich and so wonderful, right? That it fills the entire world. And I think about today, that's not possible completely, but what we can do is in little steps, we can show them a shadow of the thing to come. Our church, when our church gets together, should be a shadow of the world to come. It should be. When people hang out with us, they should not go walk away knowing anything else but Christ, right? And also that Christ has done some incredible transformation in us. That's what they should know. They should want that. Now that's, of course, the work of God in their life. It's a culmination of a lot of things happening, but we should want that, and we should point them to these things. When people think about the church, do they think about this better world, or do they think about all the ways in which we failed the world? Unfortunately, I think, and maybe it's unfair on some level, but I think unfortunately that is absolutely the narrative currently. Well, let's change the narrative. By God's grace, let's change the narrative. Let's not lament and be, oh no, they hate us. Well, we were told they were going to, right? I mean, I'm talking to the church at large, not just us. Let's stop this, they and us, right? The reality is, let's stop that. And let's say, okay, fine, let's change the narrative. What are the ways in which God's asked you to change the narrative? Where are the places where he's placed you, where you can give a shadow of the thing to come? Where you can point them to this better king and this better world? Where are those places? And by the way, let me give you a little hint. It's not on Twitter, it's not on Facebook. No. Have real relationships, have real conversations, have real friendships. Where are those places? Where are the places God's called us to do that? In what ways can we be a shadow of the thing to come, to change the narrative? Guys, we won't do that alone, okay? But we can take up our little, in a sense, our little, piece of the puzzle, our little place of responsibility, and we can do it there. and be faithful there. By God's grace, other churches, other Christians will do the same. And we'll see things begin to change. Now again, is that going to be forever? No, but it will point them to the world that is and the better king. We're going to pray. Okay, and as we do, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask you at that moment. Nathaniel's going to come up and begin to play for us. But at that moment, when I say amen, okay, you can go ahead and grab your elements, okay, for communion, and you can meet back at your seats, or you can spread out. Nathaniel, at some point, will begin to lead us in worship and begin to sing. When you're ready, go ahead and join in with that. Okay, let me just a real quick note about this, right? The point of communion is to point us to Christ. It's a shadow of the thing to come. It's a shadow of the thing that has come, and it's a shadow of the thing to come. That's really important for us to see. It's a object lesson of what Christ has done for us on the cross, and it is a looking forward to the day when we will take this meal with him again someday in the better world with the perfect King. All right. So that being said, this is meant for those who are believers, who have put their faith and trust in Christ. And if you have children here this morning, let me just encourage you you're their best discipler, and so you know what's best for them. Maybe this is an opportunity to teach them why we do this, or maybe this is an opportunity to take this with them in part of your worship. And so we'll let you be the deciders of those things, okay? But we ask again, this is for all believers. It's also a time to reflect as well, okay? And let's do that now. God, thank you. Thank you for what you've done for us. Thank you for the world the world in motion you've already put in place, this perfect world coming. And while maybe we can't see it all, we do see it through a glass dimly right now, God. One day that will all be unveiled. God, I pray though in the meantime that we would point others to this glass that's hard to see through fully, but it's we can see the picture of it nonetheless. God, I pray we would point people to that. I pray that we would live in light of those things. And I pray, Father, that you would come and you would come quickly. But until you do, God, I pray we would take up the mantle of changing the narrative, to show people the way in which you've called us as a church to live rightly and live justly, to not judge impartially, to defend the defenseless, and to create an atmosphere which helps people have the opportunity to flourish. Most importantly, God, we want to point them to you. Father, I pray that we take up that mantle. I pray that we do that personally. I pray that we do that corporately. And as we look to you today, the author and finisher of our faith, God, may we have hope. May we have hope in a world that feels like it's in chaos, God, that none of this is a surprise to you. And that one day you will come and you'll make right all the things you'll undo all the sad things, and you'll make right all the things. And at that moment, we will understand. But until then, God, I pray we'd be those who would be realistic, but also, God, we'd be hopeful. It's in Jesus' name we're able to pray. Amen.